Yeah, right when you're ready to go, Laura.
Okay, I will call this special meeting. Is it a special meeting or is it a workshop?
Workshop.
Workshop of the Wenatchee School Board to order. Since I do not have an agenda, I'm uncertain if we have the Pledge of Allegiance on the agenda today or no.
No.
We do not.
No.
Okay, great. So we are here for a presentation on Indigenous lands recognition, and I'll hand it off to our presenter and to Paul.
Laura, thank you. So we're going to do a hybrid meeting. So we have a lot of material here in person that, Laura, that we will send to you and Julie. So it's going to be a little bit more challenging. So we were expecting everybody to be in person today, but we're going to be good. We're going to figure this thing out. Mary is gonna figure this thing out exceptionally well. I know that. But I'm really excited about today for Mary Big Bowl Lewis to be joining us. It truly is an incredible honor to have her. Diane and I have had the great fortune of meeting with Mary, I think 3 or 4 different times now, and really talking about land acknowledgement and how important it is. And one thing that we did not want to do was just taking another organization's land acknowledgement, put our name on it, and call it good. We really felt like it was critical that we sat with Mary and learned about what are we truly asking for. And in that brief moment with Mary, what we learned was we needed a lot more time with Mary, and for her to present to the board. And in 2 weeks, she'll be presenting to all our principals, assistant principals, district leadership on very similar to what the board is receiving today. Again, Diane and I were fortunate to have a really brief run through, and we were just blown away with the knowledge and just my own recognition of my lack of knowledge. So I was just so excited after hearing her presentation and being able to bring that to the board today. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Diana, right? Are we going you first or Mary first?
We'll just hand it off to Mary to do her introduction.
Perfect. So I'm going to hand it off to Mary Big Bowl Lewis, and she will give you a little bit more on her background. And then I'm just going to hand it to you for you to facilitate.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. One of the things that will be key is the proximity to this is really important for the larger community here.
Okay. Is this good? Yeah? Okay. A little closer so we can hear you overhead too. How's that?
Yeah,
Okay.
Just keep that up.
Okay. Okay. Tilhust, Ishtiganju, hello. Opi Nidaniku. Hello, my name is Mary Big Bowl Lewis. I first wanted to say thank you to the Wenatchee School District Board for taking the time to meet with me and give me the opportunity to have this space to talk about my truths and to speak from the heart about why I feel it's important that land recognition with purpose is important. And so a little bit about me, I was born and raised here in Wenatchee. I'm a WHS alumni, that's pretty cool. And we've had an ongoing effort with educating our valley about the original stewards of this land. And that's through a business venture that my husband and I launched a couple of years ago called Wenatchee Wear. And the purpose of Wenatchee Wear is to create awareness and educate and amplify Indigenous voices through authentic threads. So we create wearable art. We design with a purpose. The purpose is to integrate education into something that we love. And it's something that can be for the whole family. And so, kind of our first breakout session that we're gonna do, but we can just talk about this in general, is to ask each of you about Native American, local Native American facts that you know. Being here, a resident in the Wenatchee Valley or Chelan County, what is something that you guys know about local Native Americans? Anybody first?
We all jump at once.
I brought a prop.
Nice, that's a great book.
So yes, that's about geology, and I would call it oral and cultural history.
Mhm.
And I guess the other thing I would think about when you talk about the land is how the land is related to nurture of all kinds.
Yes.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but Wenatchee, there was a tribe once in Wenatchee. The last leader was a long time ago. We are surrounded by the Colville tribe, the Yakima tribe as well. And other than the Saddle Rock history that I saw from Wenatchee Ware, I'm sad to say that I don't know too much about it.
I guess probably most of what I've learned, it's been things that I've heard from you, Mary. I didn't grow up in this area, so when I first moved here, I learned that the word Wenatchee was from an indigenous tribe that resided here. But we have a number of indigenous tribes that have lived in this area that I'm probably gonna butcher how to say their names. Puposa, is that one of them, right? I never heard of that until that tribe until I heard from you. And I'm probably blanking on the other tribal names, but I do know that the lands that were promised to some of our tribes that were in this area, particularly the Wenatchee tribe, correct, were not ever, those never came to fruition for the tribes. So I think there is a deep, rich history that I am still learning about personally, that I hope everybody in our community can learn about as we are more attuned to the indigenous voices around us. I grew up in Illinois, in a land where there are many things named after the indigenous folks that live there. But yeah, this is a different area with different tribal roots, and I so appreciate you being here to educate all of us. So thank you.
Thank you. What about online?
Can you hear me? Excuse me, can you hear me? I also did not grow up in this area, so I don't know a lot about local indigenous culture. I do know a lot of our names were derived from tribal figures, Chelan, Wenatchee. I, in my practice, interact a little bit with the Colville tribes, send them notices of land use issues and things of that that variety. But I grew up in the Oregon area, so I know a lot more about Oregon Trail and Oregon tribal culture. So this is a new education for me.
For me as well. So I formerly was the construction project manager for the Port of Chelan County. So I know that I worked with the tribes whenever we needed to break ground on a new project. One of the first projects that I worked on for the port was the Confluence Technology Center, and I understand that that area out in Old Station was very significant for the tribes that would come and meet and trade in that area. I've seen the exhibits at Rocky Reach Dam over the time, but I can't say I'm really up to speed on the history and important and significant places and events.
Thank you. So with that, it's important to understand that, we have a really good opportunity to find better ways to educate our area about the Native American history, because it's rich in culture, stories, traditions. The land is sacred, and that we believe that we belong to the land versus, just a property ownership with our names on a piece of paper. And so that, like I said, I grew up here in Wenatchee and went through the school district, and there was a real lack of local Native American history that was taught. And so if we could find a way to implement that through books like what you brought today, that's actually a book that my Uncle Randy co-wrote, and it's an amazing book. And it talks about Spexmen and the Red Star Blue Star, how they defeat Spexmen as this dragon-like creature that ruled over this area. And so they were twins, which were very uncommon in Native American culture, and that's actually Twin Peaks. So what we see over there protecting our valley, so it's the two twins that are looking over us. And so they were successful in defeating Spexmen. And it's funny, I was just talking about that story this morning too. And so it's, there's pieces of Spexmen slain throughout the valley, and you can see different pieces of him in the river, or out near Wenatchee Heights, or parts of Saddle Rock, aka Two Bears. And so, yeah, I think that this is kind of been a new push and thing to kind of learn from first perspective versus third perspective, looking at our Indigenous culture. And so that's why I really love to highlight Randy's books. We have them in our shop, and then the museum has them locally. And so, I encourage everybody to read those because they're super important to learn. And yeah, I think that history is just understanding it, learning it is really important in order to create a positive change. Because throughout Native American history, we have been oppressed throughout times through different things, whether it's through blood quantum or treaties not being upheld, which we'll go back to kind of a few things that you guys touched about. With the Native Americans, so Wenatchee is named after our tribe. Wenatchee name was given to us. We are the Piscosa. So working back in history to understand that and teaching that, otherwise you just say we're Piscosa, and like, oh, well, that's somebody else, but we're the same. And so at one point in our history, there were over 2,000 Piscosa that lived along down near the land that she was referencing earlier, and the confluence. And there was a trading post there, and my Uncle Randy and his family were really a big part of that trading post and having that there. And that the villages of the Piscosa would move from the Wenatchee River all the way up to the icicle, depending on the season, to pick berries, to go fishing. So the icicle river is really important to our people and our tribe. And those were our original and promised fishing and hunting grounds, which we actually lost those fishing and hunting rights in the treaties that were not upheld by the government. And so those were the 1855 treaty and the 1893 treaty that were proposed, and to give the Wenatchee our reservation. And unfortunately, it didn't work out that we ended up getting our reservation, and the Pascosa, the Wenatchee, are a non-federally recognized tribe that is under the governance of the Colville Confederated Tribe, which they govern 12 tribes altogether, and Colville is the only federally recognized tribe. So during those treaties, one of our chiefs had gone to negotiate with the government agent to discuss what the proposal was and how much money or what they were willing to give. And they left to go discuss with the tribe. The Yakima tribe was there, and they ended up signing the treaty. So they've always had the rights to hunt and fish along that area. And Chief Harmel was our last chief. And I wanted to share this story about part of his family and part of the history of the White River area. And so there was an article that was published in our newspaper, which is on the Colville Reservation, called the Tribal Tribune. And anybody can sign up to or subscribe to get that. And so it'll just be delivered to you. And they share things that are going on along the reservations and different news and things. But this, it was called the White River Massacre. And the Wenatchee village was attacked by the U.S. troops in 1858, that many Wenatchee men, women, and children were brutally killed. In 1975, Wenatchee tribal leader Moses George described what happened in a letter he drafted. He said there were between 60 and 75 Indians in 10 teepees. The elders were busy gathering berries, nuts, fish, and medicinal herbs, storing for winter use at all events. This tribal gathering, they were totally unaware of any wars, troubles, or malfeasance that were committed by the Yakimas, which the Yakima had seen these troops down there and attacked them. And so the U.S. troops were seeking revenge and set out to go find the tribe who did this. Well, the only tribe that they came across was this village of Pascosa, Wenatchee, that had never seen a U.S. troop or settler before. And the troops had brutally killed and murdered the entire village. And there were the only survivors of that were young children, younger boys that were set up higher to watch guard, and they were on their horses. And so there were no burial sites. It's a really sacred place, and in one of the publications that my uncle spoke about this when he was 5 years old, and that his family took them up there to go and pay respects to the people that were slain and to honor them, because it was really a sad event in our history that's not talked about, but that is our local history. That I think it's important that we understand that we're not, we're all still products of what had happened in our history, and that even though it didn't happen yesterday or last year, we still see the effects of that. And that it does, change the way that our history is written, and that we need to still recognize that and respect that those are the original stewards that did live there, and that we need to just know that. I think that's super important. One of the boys that witnessed that was William Parmelt, and he had gone down the river to another Wenatchee village, and they took him in and raised him. And by the time he was a young man, they decided to name him their chief. And so then his son, Chief John Parmelt, was our last chief. And he resided in Kashmir, and he was fighting for our land rights until the day that he died. And that was something that was really important for him, is to obtain the land, our homelands, for our tribe. And he was set to go to Washington DC, which back then was not easy. And so he had actually gone there 2 other times before that, but on this last one, just before he was set to go, him and his wife both perished in a house fire in Kashmir. And he always wanted to be laid to rest on in Kashmir on our homelands, with the goal and overall benefit being that our people wouldn't have to travel to go visit him. But little did he know that there's not very many of us that do live here, and we do have to travel. A lot of the Wenatchee Disclosa were forced to move off the homelands and onto the reservations because the government did promise certain things to help take care or in place of land and this and that. So there are many that do live on the Culpa Reservation, which is a 4-hour round trip. So there's many that do come down that still take care of the cemetery. And they actually placed a headstone there that recognizes some of the people that are there, including their last chief. But that, the Wenatchee Advisory Board was formed in 2008. And this board was set to get our fishing rights back. There was one time, where our rivers flowed red with fish, and that it was just such an abundance of the fish there, and it's just such a huge part of our dietary and just our traditions, that it was really unfortunate that we weren't welcome to go there, that we were told we couldn't. And so they went through this whole legal battle of 12 years to get our fishing rights back. And in 2010, we finally got them back, which was huge. But during that time, in 2003, there was a order of restriction placed by the other tribe that has fishing rights up there, because they didn't want us to come up there. So that was another barrier that, we had to continue to try and work past in order to practice our traditions. And thankfully, they were able to do that, but it's really hard to sustain and move forward with legal avenues because it costs a lot of money. It's, time and effort. And 12 years is a long time to fight for something that should have already been open and in place. So in order for us to move forward and move towards the reclamation, I feel that it's important for everybody to understand that history and that there's so many different layers of that. And I'm just speaking from my knowledge, and that there's so many other stories that are out there that haven't been told. But when we have the opportunity like this to come and speak, it gives us a chance to teach and to share those truths that we have. So again, I really want to say I appreciate being able to come and talk about this, because it's not an easy topic and it can be uncomfortable. But in order to change, that's part of the process, and to learning and understanding. And so the other part of recognizing why we don't know a lot about Native American history, or why it's just not taught, and why there's kind of these gaps in our history of things removed, is that there's the continued generational trauma and the continued erasure of our culture. And that happens through many different things, but some key things that I can speak of from my life are the residential schools. How many of you have heard of the residential schools? No. And so just as a kind of an explanation of that, is that a residential schools are a network of boarding schools for Indigenous peoples The network was funded by the Canadian government's Department of Indian Affairs and administered by Christian churches. The school system was created for the purpose of removing Indigenous children from the influence of their own culture and assimilating them into the dominant Canadian culture to kill the Indian in the child. Over the course of the system's more than 100-year existence, about 30% of Indigenous children, around 150,000, were placed in residential schools nationally. So there's an estimated 6,000 of those children that were placed in residential schools that died while in boarding schools. And that's only the number that they kept count of. So that's not an accurate count. So I have my direct family that was affected through that boarding schools, and I've talked with family members about what that meant and how that affected them directly, but it also affects the generations after them because they're forced to be ashamed of our culture, to not practice traditions, to stop speaking our languages. And so then we're forced to have that part removed from our lives as well. And so it's not easy for the people that were directly involved to talk about that. And the people that have opened up to me, I was very grateful that they trusted me with their stories and to help me understand my upbringing and what that meant for me. My mom was adopted when she was a baby by a white woman who was really influential in our childhood. And so I was raised as a Seventh-day Adventist, vegetarian, which is, people are like, you don't eat meat. I mean, I do now, but it's such a, kind of a odd thing for our culture to not eat meat. And so, like I said, she took us to church every weekend, and I gladly went with her because I respected her and wanted to do what she thought was right for our family. And, but then I always felt that something was missing in my life. That, okay, I've grown up here as one of the only Native Americans here in Wenatchee, and a town that's named after our tribe that is here. And, you see people like, oh, we're going to touch about Native American history today. And you're like, oh, well, that's cool, because I want to learn. And, I really wish that there was more that I could have learned throughout that. And it took me a long time to understand why I didn't have that exposure, why I felt that there was something missing in my life. And it wasn't until several years ago, I took it upon myself to start meeting people on the Caldwell Reservation and reached out to some different groups and came across this group of women that practice our traditional sweat lodges. And so our sweat lodges are a sacred spiritual tradition that we do in order to help us spiritually. And they taught me how to chop the wood. The first day I went up there in Birkenstocks, not the best wood chopping shoes. And they taught me how to stack the rocks, start the fire, transport the rocks, and then the different medicines that we use in ceremony. And after that time, I felt like I found what was missing in my life. And I knew what my purpose was here for, and that was to be present and not blend in. I need to continue to be my authentic self and to speak my truth. So that was just a real eye-opener for me, and really an instrumental part of why I'm doing what I'm doing now and why I think it's important. And at that point, I usually, it's a difficult thing to talk about. And to be open about that, without feeling the shame or guilt of not doing enough. But I was put at that time for a reason and have since then have made all these great connections with people locally, organizations locally to continue to speak about Native Americans and what that means to be here, and understanding that we all don't have the same stories as far as trauma and things. There's a lot of people that have been around culture and traditions and that do practice that constantly, that their kids do speak the languages. And I'm currently learning a language, both my languages, which for the Xhosa, the language is Inhamjin. And then for Blackfoot, it's Pekingese. And so they actually have this really cool app on a phone for the Blackfoot language, which they have pronunciations and spellings and like phonetic sounding it out and everything. And I know that Colville is working on several things to get the languages out there as well. There's also Native schools, like the Pascal Sherman School that's on the reservation in Colville, and that's a great, cool thing that, you know, my parents would always talk about, maybe we should send you guys up there so that you can learn your history. And like, I never understood how important that was because I was just here and I was happy. But I do wish that there was something here because we do have a very diverse culture in our community. And so having a safe place for Native Americans to go and gather, to speak, to practice traditions, just be together is so important. There's groups that are trying to form, and just because we don't have a space where we can go constantly, you know, a lot of times they just kind of go away and we don't do anything. But if we had a place that we could do that, it would be so amazing. Or just learning ways to implement our culture to teach that to everybody would be huge. Because, like I said, we've faced complete erasure of our culture still, even through blood mountains. How many of you have heard of blood mountains with the Native American tribes? Anybody? So not all tribes have this, but in comparison to understand what it's like, the only other thing that's similar to that is for horse breeds, is how they measure how much. So we're measured by how much Indian blood do we have, which if we don't have enough, you can't be enrolled. So that family life is no longer there. I never understood the importance of that exactly, and finding a spouse that was Native American here wasn't really going to happen because again, wasn't that many lives here. I had me and a brother and maybe some cousins, some old cousins over here. So, so that's really important to recognize. And then there's some tribes that don't have the blood quantum that just allow anybody to be a tribal member. And so they're able to maybe get benefits in certain ways. And then the enrolled tribes, which like Colville is, we can only be enrolled in one tribe. So I can't be enrolled in Colville and Blackfoot. My son is not enrolled because he doesn't have enough blood to be enrolled in the tribe, which is really unfortunate because then it creates, you know, the feeling of not belonging. And talking with him, he's like, well, I can't say that I went at Gene. I said, no, you can though, because you are Native American. And there's talk about some tribes removing that flood quantum, but then you fall into those lines of, well, what is the criteria going to be? Can anybody just join? And a lot of tribes don't want people to just join and say, hey, I'm Belleville, or I'm Cherokee, or, so it's really interesting to understand that. And there's actually this podcast that I really like, and it's on this list that I'm gonna give you guys today. It's called All My Relations Podcast. And these women are here in Washington State, and they talk about topics like flood quantum or Columbus Day, other really important things that I just love to listen and talk about. And they've had a person come on where you do have to make that choice of, I do love this person, but I can't be with them because if I'm with them, I can't live here anymore. So I would have to move and not be a part of the tribe anymore. So those are really difficult things to kind of wrap your head around, but just in order for survival and the continuance of our bloodline to continue. And yeah, those are just a couple of ways that things that have been put in place through colonization that have slowly eliminated our culture. And so finding my purpose in the cultural differences, it's important to understand too, because I speak of my truths. I want to recognize that the work that other people do, and that many people will say, like, I heard a land acknowledgement last night, it sounded nothing like yours. I explained, well, it's not supposed to be the same. Like, every organization or business or person that wants to recognize the land, it's not just a checkbox. It's not something to say, well, we did it, and we need to make them recognition with purpose. So where a lot of organizations or businesses fail is that they don't create a lasting relationship with an Indigenous-led project, business, or organization, where we see like caricatures or logos or our names being used, and we want to name this trail after you. Okay, but what does that really do for us? Because we don't have a welcoming place here. That's not going to bring somebody here to go walk on the trail, and that's just an example. That's not to say that that's not important, but how else are you going to work to continue this forward progression, to create positive change, to really give a space for Indigenous peoples to have? And like I said, I want to continue to be a good ancestor, and our culture, we are taught to give back. And so that's always, like with our medicines and things, we don't sell those. They're not ours to sell or to make profit from. That's not okay. So, and then giving back and finding ways to create the space with Wenatchee, where we wanted to bring that recognition here. And honestly, when we launched this in April of 2019, I wasn't sure how Wenatchee would react to having kind of this thrown in your face, like, hey, we're here. What do you think of this? And throughout these last 2 years, we've gotten nothing but support, and I really appreciate that because that gives me hope, and to be able to continue to teach and create that space is just so important. And with Wenatchee, where I wanted to launch a land back campaign. Land back campaigns are kind of happening throughout the US. And I have this sheet I'll hand out to you guys. There's different organizations that are doing these projects that our overall goal, well, land back seems like, I'm gonna take this back and that's ours. Well, we're never gonna have the reservation that was promised to us because it's just not gonna happen. It's been divided up and sold and resold, and it's just not possible. But what we can do is create a welcoming space for our people to come to visit, to have a place to meet. I know that the advisory board was looking for a location to house 300 people with a kitchen along the river. We don't have a space like that. We don't have somewhere that they can go to just have an annual meeting with our members. And at that point, I took a year to meet with local organizations and people to ask and see, like, well, what does that look like? How can we work together to get this to happen? And I'm the type of person to just do it. I'm like, okay, I waited. I'm just gonna do it. So I did launch a land bank project in August of 2020. And we've to date collected just over $25,000, and that's just through people donating to a GoFundMe, the Venmo, and cash. And that's people putting their trust in me and my organization and what we stand for and my business. So I'm truly grateful for that support and to know that nobody was making me fill a checkbox to say, well, what does this do? And if you don't meet this requirement, then I can't donate my $5 to you. So having that support of somebody just giving is huge. And just, again, creates this positiveness that we can do better. And I had spoken at several organizations and churches and put out the word that I do want to start a nonprofit. But this project's bigger than me. I can't handle a land back by myself. That's just not realistic. So we had an attorney reach out to donate his time. I've had people just volunteer. I don't have to look to try and convince somebody to join. They just want to be a part of it. And so we have an Indigenous-led nonprofit that currently has 12 board members that represent tribes throughout Washington State and Canada. And so we're in the formation of this, and they're going to take over the Land Act so that we can grow this further. With funding and things like that, we have our name, which is really cool. It's Indigenous Roots and Reparation Foundation. And I'm really excited for the projects that we have and the team that we have put together and what that means. So we'll be posting more about that once we're moving forward with different things. But we've had a local film, allocate part of their crowdfunding. So people are rethinking of how they can give back and help with the reparations. And so they allocate crowdfunding to land back movement like this or any other projects. And I did include organizations on here as well that are great Indigenous-led projects to align yourselves with or to find out more about what they're doing. And yeah, I'm really excited for that. So I'll go ahead and I have this little flyer here that we can give out. And it's a land acknowledgement kind of sheet that talks about, thank you. So this is also something that we have on our website, but we kind of condensed it a little bit more to just give the key points of what a land acknowledgement is and how to give it with a purpose. As I stated, as long land acknowledgements are becoming more prevalent, it is important to understand and create meaningful recognitions. It's not enough to simply state whose land you're on. It's a start towards honoring, but important to understand it's not just a trend. For hundreds of years, our government has attempted to eliminate Native Americans through genocide, eliminating our culture, oppression, and social injustices. This list is not all inclusive, but it's meant to be used as a guide. So like I mentioned, there's a lot of people that are on my other list that shared kind of recommendations for land acknowledgements. And so it's meant to be a fluid kind of piece of guide to kind of help form that land acknowledgement. But most importantly, it's important to speak about tribes in the present tense. We're still here. A lot of times what happens is that even just launching Wenatchee, where we've had a lot of people ask, well, I thought that the Wenatchee tribe was extinct because I don't see them here. And we're still here. We might not all be creating art on t-shirts, but we're still here. And so rather than speaking in a past tense, like we are gone or forgotten. And then there's just information on there to learn traditional names and pronunciations. Again, on this guide, and if you go to the Colville Kimberly Tribe website, they have this little tab that's about history and culture, and they'll have different pronunciations and languages. There's also a gal that's on our board who learned from the last fluent Inhumchin speaker our language, and she was giving classes here locally. And I'm hoping to do that more as this board is forming and allowing that to be open to more people. Because I think that's really important for people to hear our languages. It's when we're able to speak our languages or just even hear it. That's healing for us, and that's, again, creating a welcoming space and acknowledging that we are here. And so it's a language that we don't hear often, but I think that there's going to be some here that might be semi-fluent after they take her class, so that's really, really cool. I want to make an effort to spell and pronounce names correctly. We're proud of our names. That's part of our identity and who we are. Even with my last name, my maiden name is Faithful. My husband's last name is Lewis, and so I kind of put them together when we got married. I couldn't remove Faithful from my name, and a lot of times I'll get asked, is that your nickname? Is that your middle name? Is that, it's constantly misspelled with the hyphen or just removed or very big. Well, it's like it's constant. So it's important to take the time to learn those names. And I have cousins that have really cool last names too. And being here in Wenatchee, there's not a lot of Native American last names, but we're still here. Again, that's just part of who we are. There's a lot of great resources to find, which one of them he can queue up on the computer, which is the native land. And so this is a really great resource that this company, this Indigenous-led company in Canada, actually compiled this information onto this website, and also there's an app for your phone. And so when you are out hiking or recreating, it works all the time, even if you don't have internet. And so you can click on like our area, if you can navigate over there, and it tells you the treaties that were of that local area, languages, and the territories. And so if you can go onto your desktop and there's a lot of information on there, but just when you're out hiking and if you want to know whose land you're on, you can. So it's a really cool resource, and it's a working resource too. And then when people have said that there's some missing information, but they're compiling this and creating it for the public, so it's a really great resource to look into. And they'll have links within that as well to go onto like the Colville Confederated Tribes website. And so, yeah, it's just a really awesome resource to use. So again, like I said, you can download that to your phone. Web searches, just searching that out, books written from first Indigenous perspective, like the Red Star, Blue Star. Visit tribal and local museums. There are museums up in Omak and Spelem. They actually do carry some of our products too, so that's really cool to have that there. Learning the history of the tribes, kind of what I told you, but there's so much more that just barely touches the surface. Where are the tribes now? Because like I said, many don't reside on their homelands. Original language, spellings of the foods and names. Show respect for the land by being a good steward, know better, do better, and recognize that we are all individuals. Like I said, that's kind of something that gets thrown out there, that we represent our entire culture or our entire tribe, and that's definitely not what I do. And so that's important to recognize. And even if you talk to somebody else, they'll have a different story that's kind of similar, but we all have our own perspectives, and that's really important. Supporting Indigenous-led projects like the Land Back, Indigenous youth centers, or other programs. There's this really great youth center in Omak that just opened last year. It's called FYRE. It's FYRE, and they have this huge program to help the youth ages 12 through 24. And so they have like a kitchen, a closet that they can have if they need clothes, diapers and things for those young parents, a place for them to come and get help with school, with tutoring sessions, counseling opportunities, a lot of different things. So they're definitely a great organization that we'll continue to support as well. So I'm just really glad that they have formed that. And just also that not all projects require monetary support. Things like helping spread the word about it, share and like and comment on social media, talk to your friends and family about Native American history, about what you learned. I had an opportunity to visit some schools last year and give them coloring pages of the Two Bears designs. They could color it and taught them how to say grizzly bear in our language. And then they were able to take that home and show their parents. And so that was really cool that they could then teach that. And a lot of people that I talked to now, they're like, oh, Two Bears. And so I'm so excited to hear that that's being referenced as the original name of the hiking trail. So it's really cool. And then, like I said, partner your organizations or businesses or yourself with tribes or Indigenous-led projects. So now I want to give everybody the opportunity to kind of come together and create a list or ideas of what you guys see as what can the school district do to create a purposeful land recognition. What are your thoughts and ideas for being able to include that in the land recognition?
Well, I was really struck by the point that you made about that it's not just recognizing the land, it's maintaining that relationship. And that is an opportunity for all of us to grow together. And because we are a school district, I think we have a unique position. I think the education of our students in terms of the Indigenous people who have lived in our area, you know, there is some of that taught, but, you know, there are assemblies that we could have. We could have a richer curriculum. I don't believe my daughters, when they were in elementary school, learned specific things about the Desposa or Wenatchee tribes. That it was more different types of structures that they would live in, and you know, they did fishing or they did gathering, but it was it felt a little detached from where we're living right here. And so I just think this is a really unique opportunity that students could really find more connection with, not just the tribes when they were active and living here, but again, layered with where are they now? You know, and some of them are in Colville, some might be living here in Wenatchee like yourself. So it opens up, I think, a bigger conversation of not just history, but what is our role as we all move forward as stewards of this land, and how do we have relationships with our Indigenous people that are living locally? How do we support them, and how can we learn from the mistakes in the past that treaties weren't honored and things like that? I just think it's a really rich opportunity as a school district to include much of what you talked about today. So, and not to say that can all go into land acknowledgement, obviously, but I think that relationship that you're talking about, it opens the door to us having a deeper curriculum to say, how do we acknowledge that relationship and honor the people who have deep history of trauma at the hands of people who didn't have respect for them. So, you know, thank you.
Yeah, and one of our board members, he actually works with plants and children. So getting them out there and planting them, taking care of them. And so that's part of our goal, is to have a branch, like a committee or so within our organization, to then work with schools, possibly to get them out there to take care of the land, pick up garbage and plant and take care of them. And we'll look at them in 5 years and see how much it's grown. He also teaches the native languages, the names for the plants too. And so they'll create little signs for them.
I appreciate you saying that, because I know our second graders do the science field experience, and they go up to a local hiking trail where, you know, we should be incorporating this land history into that, you know, that lesson they learn. You know, I think if you've had kids going through the school district, we all have the flower that they paint while they're out at Jacobson Trail, which is, I'm putting two and two together. Is it also yeah. So I think we're maybe already doing some of this, but just, you know, pinpointing it and saying, okay, you know, bringing it back to its original ties. What I would like to see is the recognition of our current student Native population. We have a student population. It's small, but including them in that line of acknowledgement, because you speak to the idea, you know, that shame of kind of, you know, suppressing our culture because it's not accepted. And I think, you know, recognizing it, you know, sheds a positive light, so that we can slowly build up that confidence that, not saying it's not there, but, you know, acknowledgement that we are recognizing you and our land.
Yeah, I think that's really important to include that. Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to begin with saying I haven't a clue about how to proceed because it's such a loose and widely dimensioned topic to look at. And maybe I'll begin with, I wrote down 3 things that you talked about, the residency program in Canada and other reasons that made Indigenous peoples, First Nations, have a sense of guilt about who they were. And I think that's something that we need to recognize. Then the other side is the guilt of the colonials who created all the harm. I think you have to throw in, then that might be, say, 2 generations away from where you and I are. How do we absorb that joint history and do it in a healing way? So I think I like the approach that you used in a lot of ways. This is all about belonging. We belong together, we share, and it's interesting when you talk about the 1/8 or 1/16 and whether it loses economic and voting rights, because it made me think about assimilation and how somebody who, let's say you're an Italian and you ended up in England and became English within a generation or 2, and that's taken away from you. So all of this is saying, I don't really know. Something you wanted a lasting relationship with purpose. And I think that's very good, not just a token. The other thing I think when we look at the background is an increasing level of understanding and respect. Maria talked about the natural science work. I actually wrote a note to the executive director of the Land Trust that although they do a lot of work, maybe they could do some more. And I think the museum does a lot. So there's an opportunity for partnerships, and of course the school district could fit into that. So then where are some ways to go? And I thought about 3 angles, and I'm not looking at an acknowledgement, I'm looking at other things. I actually sent an article from the Anacortes American to the school district about 6 months ago, where the district partnered with the Sunnamish tribe, and they have a whole course, and it was done over several years. It looked pretty impressive, and of course there's a very close relationship there in living together, not Kabul versus here. When I say, I mean, there was more to work with human-wise, I think. So, you know, what can we do about including the history in the education, which is not a land acknowledgement, but it's something that's there. And then what I wrote down is that 99% of us who are not Indigenous people, we don't share your blood, but we do walk on the same soil and breathe the same air. And I think that's the concept that maybe a land acknowledgement is trying to get to, that it's common and strong and respect the people who were the first recorded people who used it. And then can we do something like that in a statement? So I don't know about a statement, but these are all random thoughts that I would put out there in a brainstorming. And then I had another weird idea. People have peace poles or something like that. And I think of the border with Canada right now, and then that peace park is actually quite an important thing in COVID. You could have a statement, or maybe we could have an area in the school district, which is a memorial of our common land heritage, something physical that could be incorporated in customs and practices and might be a reminder. So I'm ending up by saying, I haven't a clue, but I just wanted to throw out the whole wide range of things that you could look at and see who else gives you ideas.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you. Yeah, I've talked with the Land Trust, and so we're actually working on some things with them. And they do have a parcel of land that they said that we can use for cultural practices. And so I'm gonna leave that up to my board to decide how we move forward with that. So I do appreciate them helping where they can. And as far as, you know, keeping our similarities in mind and what our goal is. And so what their goal is about protecting the land, which part of our goal is to do that too, but also to have a community center. So yeah, I think that that's all great. And I agree that belonging together and that, you know, we are all here, and just to celebrate our diverse community is really what that's about, and to recognize, and I appreciate that.
And I appreciate you. That's
Thank you. Anybody else?
I'm with Martin in my relative ignorance as to how to proceed. I'm going to fully admit that. So it seems to me that more public information is of value. Curriculum for both staff and students. I had no idea about the White River Massacre. That sounds it's very disturbing, you know, to hear that history, and I had no awareness of that. So I just you know, gradually building awareness of the history and the significance of various events would be very useful in furthering the land recognition. I'm not sure if that's what we're calling it, that I think is where we're headed as a district, that we are planning to consider, you know, a normal and regular recognition. I have heard that maybe that is something that's read at the beginning of board meetings. I'm not sure how just out of the blue that fits in without some, you know, background, so that everybody understands, everybody who's listening understands why we might be considering doing that, posting on our website, you know, some basic information. Yeah, anyway, the history is sorely lacking, so I look forward to being better informed.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And that's, you know, the recognition would be used and give a good opportunity for the board to explain why it's important for the board to do that. And that can be included. And like I said, there's not any wrong acknowledgement. And that's important to create one that fits the organization or the board directly.
Yeah, I'll share the comments that, you know, I'm not entirely sure where to go with it. I don't know specifically what's taught as far as the curriculums. Certainly it looks for basic education, like the ability to supplement some of what students are also learning with some of this more personal history would be a good learning opportunity. But, you know, I don't think at the board level we decide what exactly the is taught in class, but it would seem appropriate to work some of that in to the extent we're not doing it. You know, as far as I'm a little more reluctant if there's like a physical monument on the school property, because I think if we open that door up to one group, we subject ourselves to having to open something up to various other groups to the same degree. Not saying it's not a good idea, but you know, I like opportunities for assemblies. You know, Laura, maybe a board level acknowledgement would be through a proclamation of sorts. You know, a one-time annual reading maybe of some type of recognition. It could coincide with, I know the students do a lot of work related to salmon festivals and other local sort of events. Maybe that would be coincide with either when students typically learn about some of the native cultures or some of these other activities, but to, you know, I wouldn't be opposed to that at all. But again, I don't know, you know, exactly where to go with it, but those are just some ideas I had to further learning. I think to the extent we have students in school that are of this demographic, I would like to see their acceptance and whatnot, as part of our look into diversity and making sure that as we do that work, that we're considering all spectrums of diversity and student culture. So we may be taking that into consideration on that end as well.
I think that this meeting actually serves as an introduction for, having a land acknowledgement read at every single one at the start of our board meetings, as well as public events. I work for Wenatchee Valley Community College, and we have strong ties with the tribal community. We have a campus in OMAC, and I know for our board meetings, it's read by our trustee chair. And also last week we had the Stand Against Racism event, so it was read before that. I think this is a really, really good first step. It's an introduction as to, that will guide future, whether it's future introductions to whether it's our curriculum, community events, building naming. About 2 years ago, we had a building up in our OMAC campus named after George Wendell. And even Wenatchee Hall here at Wenatchee campus, and did the whole ceremony with the smudging and the prayer. And so, I don't think we're quite there yet, but I think this is a good introduction, establishing a land acknowledgement that fits our institution, so that we can connect the different pieces that our tribes, our community, our students has to offer.
So I just want to tag on to what Maria said. There was just a Stand Against Racism event last week, and Mary actually gave the land acknowledgement. Thank you for doing that. So I do think having this spoken before every board meeting is impactful. And although various meetings, and I can't speak for city council meetings or county commissioner meetings, if those groups are doing that yet, but I do know that WSD, every one of our legislative sessions that we were having as an online meeting, they always started with the land acknowledgement, and much of WSD does that for our state organization, does that before different meetings. At our conference, they had, if you showed up to an hour of a particular topic, usually the speakers would say where they were from and acknowledge the land, if they were presenting on that land, or if they were in Olympia or wherever for the event, they would acknowledge that land. So I do think it is fairly widely accepted in WSD, which we are all a part of as a school district, and we are seeing it in other groups like the college and Stand Against Racism events, and I've seen it at other events in town as well. So I think that it is something that whose time has come, and that it needs to stay. That's not just a passing fancy, but that it is, again, this opportunity to recognize the original stewards documented for the land, as well as our ongoing relationship with the people that we respect and honor. So I hope that we can continue to develop this today. I know it's a lot of work, but it sounds like we need to do some research, like maybe getting on the Native Land app, looking to see the different tribes that had been stewards for, because our district is big. And I know that it may not have just been one tribe, but several tribes that we need to be considering in that land acknowledgement. And then, but again, just those pieces, a quick blurb, but again, it's more than just stating that before a board meeting, but the ongoing work that we as a district can partner with our local Indigenous people and recognizing, yes, they are still here. It's not a historical thing only. It is a current relationship that we want to have. So, thank you.
Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree with Maria. Today was a great first step in the building of our knowledge. Mary will be with our administrative team, that larger administrative team, in 2 weeks. Continuing to ask, she will be asking that group those same questions that she asked you. I thought your feedback was fantastic, really putting us in that space. That belonging is always such an important part of who we are as humans and how important it is for each person to feel like there is that connection, that they do belong in a meaningful, intentional, purposeful way is key. Loved, Julie, what you had said about our students, making sure that we engage our Indigenous students into this conversation, how impactful that could be, and really making sure that we give them voice in this process. So yeah, first step, but like all of you, your response was the same as Diana's response and mine, like, wow, did not know that. And what Mary said as well, that I think is just so important to highlight. This is not a history from 200 years ago only, 300, 400, 500 years ago. This is a history that is some of the parents, aunts, uncles, who have faced some of these injustices. So this is not, you have to go in the Wayback Machine. This is really recent information that is still impacting a number of our Indigenous community members, either here in Wenatchee or around the area. Mary, I'll hand it back to you for any closing statements.
Thank you. So I appreciate all the feedback, and I really love that, including the current students in the process, but also recognizing them now. That way that they know that they are represented and that they're just not another statistic on their surveys. So that's really important. So I appreciate all of that. And if anybody has any questions or things that they would like to add, I'm welcome to email me, and I'll leave you with my business cards as well. So if there's any like keywords, statements, things that you feel are important that align with the school district and the land acknowledgement, please let me know. That way that we can compile a statement that is going to represent the school district as a whole. So again, thank you, Landlab, for the opportunity to come and speak today. I appreciate that. It's nice to see people in person. So we've had a lot of Zoom calls recently, so I appreciate that. And again, if you guys have any questions or comments, feel free to reach out to me.
Mary, outstanding, outstanding. Thank you. Thank you, board.
Today, so I will adjourn and we will see you next time.
Thank you. Bye, everybody.
Bye.